in the vast expanse of what scholars called the civilized galaxy. More than 15,000 species had evolved beyond the threshold of administrative competence. They had achieved what the ancient texts referred to as bureaucratic transcendence, the ability to manage paperwork faster than they could create it. Their security systems were impeccable, their administrative channels flawless, their quantum-encrypted databanks unbreachable. Yet they all feared instinct. 17 millennia after the first interstellar journey, the Galactic Alliance established the Apex Classification System, ACS, to categorize every potential predator across charted space. The system measured threat levels from harmless, 1.0, to extinction level, 10.0, incorporating factors like adaptive intelligence, offensive capabilities, and reproductive rate. The Alliance maintained that this system brought order to chaos, allowing citizens to navigate the cosmos with calculated risk. Then, there was Sector 947 Theta, better known as the Epsilon Quarantine Zone, sealed off 3 centuries ago after an incident involving a rogue terraforming experiment. The entire region remained strictly off-limits to all but the most heavily armed research vessels. Even then, permission to enter required 17 separate authorization codes and a mental health evaluation. This brings us to the Tethari survey ship Diligent Seeker, currently hovering at the very edge of the quarantine zone. The vessel resembled an administrative castle floating in space, all gleaming efficiency and methodical purpose. Its mission? To scan the outer perimeter for any signs of biological drift, ensuring the containment protocols remained effective. Chief Technician Verax adjusted the scanner calibrations for the 3rd time, his 4 delicate manipulator arms moving in perfect synchronization across the control panel. His species had evolved under high gravity, resulting in a compact frame that excelled at precise movements. Bioscan report shows 0 anomalies again, he announced to the small bridge crew. Same as the last 14 perimeter points. Alarm specialist Doral made a sound that approximately translated to a relieved sigh. The Tethari were notorious for their anxiety levels, which made them excellent at anticipating problems, but terrible at handling them when they actually occurred. Perhaps we can finish early today, suggested emergency medical specialist Menari, the slender, quiet member of the crew. The quarantine has held for 3 centuries. I doubt anything has changed since yesterday's scan. Verax was about to agree when the console emitted an unfamiliar tone. The sound itself was so unusual that all 3 crew members froze. "What classification is that alert?" Doral asked, already reaching for the emergency protocols manual. "I don't recognize the pattern." Verax's manipulators danced across the screens. "The system is confused. It's detecting 2 simultaneous biological signatures in zone Epsilon 17, on the 3rd moon of Kepler 442c. "That's impossible," Menari said, leaning forward. "Nothing survives on that moon. The surface is a corrosive wasteland. And yet," Verax continued, "we have 2 clear readings. One matches the profile of—" His voice faltered. "This can't be right. One signature matches a Vorthax 8.9. The bridge fell silent. Every educated being in the galaxy knew what a Vorthax was. Crystalline carapace, acid blood, multiple articulated limbs ending in serrated talons. They were walking nightmares that had claimed entire colony ships. A classification of 8.9 placed it just below planet killers. "And the second signature?" Menari finally asked. "That's the odd part," Verax replied. "It registers as completely unremarkable. Standard bipedal, oxygen-breathing, carbon-based. The kind of reading you'd get from any moderately evolved sentient." "Both signatures at the same location?" Doral was now practically vibrating with anxiety. "Within 3 meters of each other," Verax confirmed, "and both are active." The ship's AI intervened, its soothing voice designed to prevent panic. "Anomalous reading detected. Commencing diagnostic protocols. Please disregard all bioscan results until verification complete. The system thinks it's malfunctioning, Mineri observed, because the scenario is impossible. Nothing survives a Vorthax encounter, especially not an unremarkable bipedal. Protocol dictated they should immediately report the anomaly to Central Command and withdraw to a safe distance. The quarantine zone was strictly off-limits. After all, their mission parameters were clear: scan, report, never engage. But the impossibility of the readings nagged at them. A technical malfunction? Perhaps. But the Diligent Seeker's equipment was certified to 99.98% accuracy. And if there actually was a Vorthax in the quarantine zone, Central Command would need to know immediately. I propose we descend for visual confirmation, Verax said, surprising even himself with the suggestion. Low altitude only. We don't even need to land. That violates at least 7 safety protocols, Doral pointed out, already sweating through his uniform. And fulfills our primary directive of thorough perimeter assessment, Verax countered. If there's truly a Vorthax in there, the entire sector security plan needs revision. Minari nodded slowly. I'm curious about that second signature. What if it's a non-threatening life form, somehow coexisting with an apex predator? It would revolutionize our understanding of xenobiology. After 20 minutes of heated debate and careful reading of the exact mission parameters, they made their decision. The Diligent Seeker descended through the thin atmosphere of Kepler 442c's third moon, its sensors fine-tuned to the coordinates of the mysterious biological signatures. What they saw would change galactic society forever. At the edge of a jagged ravine lay the splayed body of a Vorthax, its crystalline carapace shattered along a perfect line from anterior sensory node to posterior mobility appendage. Acid had eaten into the soil around it, creating pools of sickly blue liquid. The creature was unquestionably dead, its fearsome anatomy now just an exhibit of broken pieces. And beside it, using what appeared to be a makeshift jacket as a pillow, lay a sleeping human female. The crew stared in disbelief at the monitor. According to their instruments, the human was in perfect health, breathing normally, despite the toxic environment. She appeared to be in her early 30s by human standards, with dark hair tied back in a practical fashion. She wore sturdy clothing suited for wilderness exploration, though nothing that could be considered protective armor. This is impossible, Doral whispered. Not for the first time that day. Humans are classified as administrative capable, physically unremarkable. They can't kill Vorthax. Nothing kills Vorthax without heavy artillery. She seems to be sleeping, Minari observed with scientific detachment that barely concealed her astonishment. Next to a predator's corpse, breathing normally despite the acid residue, Verax made a decision that would later be scrutinized by 17 different review boards. We're bringing her aboard. The extraction team, consisting of 6 Tethiari security officers in full hazard suits, approached the sleeping human with the caution normally reserved for handling unstable antimatter. They expected resistance, sudden movements, perhaps even violence. What they got instead was a yawn. The human woman opened her eyes as the team surrounded her, blinking away sleep with casual ease. She sat up, stretched, and looked at the nervous security team with mild interest. "Any of you know where I can find coffee?" she asked, in perfectly standard galactic common. The security team, trained for every possible scenario except this one, froze in confusion. One of them fainted inside his hazard suit, creating an awkward situation as the environmental system struggled to compensate for the sudden change in occupant consciousness. Doral and Keth, the senior security officers, exchanged panicked glances through their visors. Their training manual had no protocol for casual conversation with apex predator killer. "You will come with us," Keth finally managed, his voice quavering despite the suit's audio enhancements. The human woman shrugged. "Sure, why not? My campsite was getting boring anyway." She stood up, brushed dust from her clothes, and picked up her jacket. Name's Alara, by the way, since we're going to be friends and all. 20 minutes later. Alara sat in the Diligent Seeker's interview room, sipping a steaming cup of something the ship's synthesizer had assured her was an approximate terrestrial caffeine analog. She grimaced at the taste, but continued drinking it anyway. Across from her, Verax, Minari, and a very nervous Doral attempted to conduct what their manual called a first contact interview. Despite the fact that humans had been part of the Galactic Alliance for centuries, it was just that no one had ever met one quite like this. "Let me understand correctly," Verax said, his 4 manipulators twitching slightly as he reviewed the preliminary scan results. "You encountered a Vorthax 8.9 Apex Predator, and you defeated it." "If by defeated you mean killed it, so it wouldn't eat me, then yes," Alara replied matter-of-factly. "It wasn't particularly difficult once I figured out its joint structure." The 3 interviewers stared at her. The recording device captured 27 seconds of complete silence. "How did you kill a Vorthax with no weapons?" Doral finally blurted out, unable to contain himself any longer. Alara set down her cup. "Applied leverage and basic anatomy. Its exoskeleton had a structural weakness along the central nervous channel. Enough pressure at the right angle. And..." She made a cracking gesture with her hands. "Physics is physics, even for space monsters." Another long silence followed. The ship's AI was quietly running a background analysis on the human's physiology, searching for any sign of genetic enhancement, cybernetic augmentation, or hidden weaponry. It found nothing out of the ordinary. "Weren't you afraid?" Minari asked, genuinely curious from both a medical and psychological perspective. Alara considered this. "I mean, sure. At first. It was big and had too many limbs, and that acid stuff was gross. But once the adrenaline kicked in, it was just problem-solving. You know how it is when something's trying to eat you." They did not, in fact, know how it was. The civilized species of the galaxy had spent millennia specifically arranging their societies so nothing would try to eat them. "And why were you sleeping next to its corpse?" Verax asked, trying to understand the incomprehensible. "I was tired after the fight," Alara said with a shrug. "And I needed to make sure it was actually dead before heading back to my ship. Must have dozed off while waiting. Is there any chance of better coffee around here? This stuff tastes like it was filtered through a gym sock." As the interview continued, word of the impossible human spread throughout the ship. Emergency transmissions were sent to Central Command, triggering a cascade of increasingly panicked responses through the administrative hierarchy of the Galactic Alliance. By the time Alara had finished her 3rd cup of the terrible coffee substitute, 17 different agencies had declared various levels of emergency. The Military Council had convened an urgent session, and the Philosophical Consortium had opened a symposium titled "The Existential Post-Ethical Crisis of Casual Apex Predator Elimination." "So," Alara said, oblivious to the galactic chaos she had sparked, "any chance I can get a ride back to my ship? I was supposed to be done with this camping trip by Tuesday. I've got a dentist appointment and my cat's litter box needs changing." The research expedition to study a live Vorthax specimen was hastily assembled under the direction of Dr. Phalant Tarnas, head of xenobiology research at the Central Galactic Academy. 27 of the most brilliant scientific minds in the Alliance, along with a security detail that would have been excessive for a small war, converged on the Epsilon quarantine zone. They arrived to find that Alara's ship was a basic single-person scout vessel with minimal defensive capabilities and a small storage compartment filled with what she described as camping essentials: a sleeping bag, some dehydrated food packets, a multi-tool, and several books on interstellar wilderness survival. "You came to the most dangerous quarantine zone in the galaxy. On a camping trip?" Dr. Tarnas asked. his specialized vision membranes unable to fully process the concept. The guidebook said it had challenging terrain and unique geological formations. Alara explained, pointing to a dog-eared copy of Solo Adventurer's Guide to the Outer Rim. It didn't mention anything about crystal monsters with acid blood, though I'm thinking of writing a strongly worded review. Meanwhile, in the grand crystal chambers of the Military Council, Admiral Keth Boren pounded his tentacle appendage on the floating podium. "This is a security nightmare of the highest order," he declared to the assembled representatives of the Alliance's combined defense forces. "If humans can kill Vorthax with their bare hands, what else are they capable of? We need to immediately revise their classification in the ACS." Across the galaxy, in the meditation spheres of the Philosophical Consortium, Professor Yathandro was leading a panel discussion on the moral implications of treating apex predator elimination as a casual recreational activity. The human's attitude suggests a fundamental disconnect from the ethical weight of taking life, the professor intoned to a captivated audience of scholars. She speaks of killing an 8.9 classification entity, as though it were no more significant than swatting an insect. One of the younger philosophers raised a tentative appendage. But isn't that precisely what the Vorthax was trying to do to her? Consume her as insignificant prey? The ensuing debate lasted 17 hours and resulted in 3 new schools of philosophical thought. Back on the Diligent Seeker, Alara had been given temporary quarters while the various administrative branches of the Alliance decided what to do with her. She spent most of her time reading, occasionally answering the increasingly strange questions posed by researchers, and complaining about the coffee. "I just don't understand what the big deal is," she told Minari during one of their conversations. "Where I come from, if something tries to eat you, you defend yourself. It's basic survival." "That's precisely what fascinates us," Minari replied. "Most civilized species would have either fled or died. The concept of actively engaging and defeating an apex predator without technology is revolutionary." Alara laughed. "Trust me, if I'd had a big gun or whatever, I would have used it. I just had to work with what I had." Which was? Observation, opportunity, and really good upper body strength from rock climbing. Plus, I took an anatomy class in college. Turns out exoskeletons have similar weak points across most species. As days turned into weeks, Alara's presence created ripples throughout Alliance society. Humans had always been considered a minor species, administratively competent, but physically unremarkable. Now, security agencies across 17 sectors were frantically reevaluating their threat assessments. Educational institutions began offering courses on practical approaches to xenobiology and applied physics in predator defense. The media was filled with speculation about whether all humans possessed Alara's capabilities, or if she was an outlier. Then came the delegations. It began with a formal request from the Zephyrian Empire, a species that communicated primarily through sound waves and had a cultural fascination with destructive harmonics. They proclaimed Alara a harmony guardian and insisted she be brought to their capital world for respectful study of her sonic disruptive capabilities. The fact that she had used no sonic abilities whatsoever in defeating the Vorthax seemed irrelevant to them. Next came the Empathic Collective, a non-verbal species whose social structure was built entirely around shared emotional states. They proposed that Alara serve as an emotional connector, helping them rediscover the violent aspects of their emotional spectrum that had been bred out of their species millennia ago. The Military Council, not to be outdone, offered her a position in their Strategic Special Forces, with the rank of Combat Specialist First Class, and the responsibility of developing training protocols for unarmed apex confrontation. The Philosophical Consortium went furthest of all, declaring her a practical deity and commissioning a temple dedicated to applied leverage and basic anatomy. By the time the 17th delegation had arrived, each with their own proposal for how Alara should serve their particular interests. The diligent seeker had been transformed from a survey vessel into an impromptu diplomatic hub. Holographic representatives from across the galaxy crowded its communication systems, each making impassioned speeches about why Alara should return with us. Alara watched the proceedings with growing amusement and irritation. When Verax apologetically informed her of yet another delegation requesting an audience, she sighed. "Do any of them have decent coffee?" "I don't believe that's been mentioned in their proposals," Verax admitted. "Then they're all missing the point," she muttered. "I just want to finish my camping trip, see my dentist, and change my cat's litter box. Is that so complicated?" Apparently, it was. The Alliance administrative system had no protocol for handling a being who had casually upended their understanding of species capabilities. Every agency wanted to study her. Every military wanted to recruit her. Every philosophical school wanted to analyze her, and no one seemed interested in what she actually wanted. The situation might have continued indefinitely, if not for the arrival of Inspector Quell Moraus from the Galactic Insurance Regulatory Board. The GURB was perhaps the most powerful, yet least appreciated organization in the Alliance. While military forces might control territory, and philosophers might influence thought, the insurers controlled risk. And in a galaxy of 15,000 species with varying degrees of technological development, risk management was everything. Inspector Moraus was a small, unassuming being with skin that shifted colors according to regulatory conditions. They arrived without fanfare, requested a private meeting with Alara, and spent precisely 17 minutes in conversation with her. When they emerged, Moraus called for a general assembly of all delegations. After careful consideration of the unique circumstances, the inspector announced to the gathered representatives, "The GURB has classified human Alara as a protected galactic entity under Regulation 947B, subsection 42. A murmur ran through the assembly. Protected entity status was rarely granted, and usually only to beings of tremendous cultural or historical significance. This classification, Moraus continued, entitles the subject to diplomatic immunity across all Alliance territories, comprehensive travel insurance, and exemption from standard administrative taxation. In return, she agrees to attend ceremonial functions, provide general consultation on practical solutions, and submit quarterly reports on a strictly voluntary basis." "This is unprecedented," protested Admiral Boren. "The military implications alone are covered under subsection 42 Alpha." Moraus interrupted smoothly. "Ms. Alara is not obligated to join any military force, participate in combat training, or engage in any activity against her will. But the philosophical insights," began Professor Yathandro, "are her intellectual property, as outlined in subsection 42 Beta." Moraus said, "Worship is permitted, but not mandatory." One by one, the inspector addressed and dismissed the objections of each delegation. The color of their skin shifted through 17 different regulatory hues during the process, indicating the complex interplay of insurance clauses being invoked. In the end, a compromise was reached. Alara would receive the benefits of protected entity status, including unrestricted travel rights and a modest stipend. In exchange, she would make herself available for occasional consultation and cultural exchange. More importantly, she would not be required to kill any more apex predators unless she chose to do so. Back on the diligent seeker, Alara read through the contract with the practiced eye of someone who had worked in banking. She raised an eyebrow at certain clauses, nodded appreciatively at others, and finally shrugged. "So basically, you're paying me to be myself. I can live with that." Inspector Moraus's skin turned a satisfied shade of regulatory completion. "The Alliance recognizes value when it encounters it. Your unique perspective on practical problem-solving will benefit many. And I get to go home? Whenever you wish, With an escort fleet, of course. Of course, Alara said dryly. Because nothing says low profile like a convoy of battleships. 6 months later, Alara was traveling across the galaxy with an entourage of dozens of ships maintaining a respectful distance. She visited 17 different star systems, attended diplomatic functions where she was introduced with increasingly elaborate titles, and generally enjoyed the perks of being a protected entity. Her quarterly reports to the GURB were models of brevity. Still alive. Haven't killed anything this month. Coffee still unavailable in 17 star systems. Suggest upgrading interstellar transit options. The various delegations that had once competed for her attention now competed to provide her with amenities. The Zephyrian Empire constructed a special acoustic chamber that could reproduce the exact sound frequency of Earth's ocean waves. The Empathic Collective created an emotional translation matrix that allowed them to experience her unique human reactions. The Military Council named a new tactical maneuver after her, and the Philosophical Consortium continued work on their temple, though Alara firmly declined the offer to have her DNA embedded in the foundation stones. Through it all, she maintained her practical approach to life. When asked by a breathless young reporter from the Galactic Information Network how it felt to be the most famous human in Alliance history, she shrugged. I'm still just a banker who happened to go camping in the wrong place. The fact that I killed a space monster doesn't change who I am. But you've revolutionized our understanding of interspecies capabilities, the reporter insisted. You've challenged the entire basis of the Apex classification system. Alara sipped her coffee. Real coffee, specially imported from Earth at great expense by one of her many admirers, and considered this. Look, she finally said, I think everyone's overthinking this. I'm not special. Any human with basic anatomy knowledge and enough adrenaline could have done what I did. The difference is, I didn't panic. Is that the secret? Not panicking. That and leverage. Physics works everywhere, even in quarantine zones. On the first anniversary of what was now officially called the Vorthax incident, Alara attended a grand ceremony at Alliance headquarters. Representatives from all 15,000 member species gathered to commemorate what many now considered a turning point in galactic social evolution. Admiral Borin, who had eventually become one of Alara's strongest supporters, presented her with a ceremonial weapon, a beautifully crafted blade made from a fragment of Vorthax carapace. Though you need no weapons, he said formally. We honor your practical approach to survival. Professor Yathandro, who had published 17 papers on the Alara paradigm, presented her with a bound collection of philosophical texts inspired by her actions. Though you claim no special insight, the professor intoned, your casual relationship with violence has forced us to re-examine our fundamental assumptions about ethical engagement with predatory species. Throughout the ceremony, Alara accepted the gifts and accolades with good humor and minimal fuss. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it brief. I appreciate all the attention. Really. But I think the lesson here isn't about me or what I did. It's about how sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. You don't always need committees or advanced technology or philosophical debates. Sometimes you just need to understand the problem in front of you and deal with it directly. She paused, looking out at the assembled dignitaries. Oh, and thanks for the real coffee. That was the best gift of all. Life settled into a new pattern for Alara. She divided her time between Earth, where she resumed her banking career, much to the confusion of her colleagues, and her travels as a protected entity. The escort fleet gradually reduced in size as the novelty of her status diminished, though she was never without at least a token security detail. The Epsilon quarantine zone was reclassified and opened for limited research expeditions. Studies of the deceased Vorthax led to breakthroughs in understanding predator biology, though no one ever duplicated Alara's feat of defeating one unarmed. Dr. Tarnas published a comprehensive paper on human adaptability in extreme situations, which became required reading at the Xenobiology Academy. Verax, Minari, and Doral were commended for their decision to investigate the anomalous readings. Those 17 new protocols were implemented to prevent similar regulatory violations in the future. And Inspector Moraus received a promotion within the GURB for resolving what could have been a major diplomatic incident without increasing insurance premiums across the sector. As for Alara herself, she found that being a protected entity had its advantages. She never had to wait in line at interstellar customs. Restaurants across the galaxy competed to serve her, and she received so many free camping supplies that she had to donate most of them to charity. But sometimes, in quiet moments between official functions and exploration trips, she would think back to that moment on the moon of Kepler 442c, the heart-pounding terror as the Vorthax charged, the clarity that came with the realization of its weakness, and the profound relief of survival. She never told anyone the complete truth, that it had been pure luck, a desperate grab as she tripped, her hand finding the exact point where the creature's crystalline structure was weakest. A 1-in-a-million chance that had changed her life and galactic society forever. Some things, she decided, were better left as legend. The galaxy needed its myths, even if they were built on fortunate accidents. 2 years after the incident, Alara was having dinner with Inspector Moraus, who had become something of a friend despite their official relationship. "I've been meaning to ask," Alara said, cutting into what the menu described as Earth-approximated steak. "Why did you step in with that protected entity classification? You could have let the delegations fight over me forever." Moraus's skin rippled through several regulatory shades before settling on the color of confidential disclosure. The GURB projected a 78.3% probability of interspecies conflict if the situation continued. They explained, 17 different cultural groups, each convinced they had the right to claim you. The insurance implications were catastrophic. So it was just risk management. At first, yes. Moraus took a sip of their beverage, which glowed faintly in the restaurant's dim lighting. "But then, I read the transcript of your initial interview. Your practical approach to an impossible situation was refreshing. In a galaxy drowning in administrative procedures and philosophical debates, someone who simply acts is rare." Alara laughed. "I'm just a banker who got lucky." "Perhaps, but you've made the entire alliance reconsider its assumptions about capability and threat. That's not nothing." Later that evening, as Alara stood on the observation deck of her hotel, looking out at the glittering expanse of the galactic core, she reflected on how strange her life had become. She had never wanted to be famous or influential. She'd just wanted to go camping, see some interesting geological formations, and be home in time to change her cat's litter box. Instead, she had become a living legend, a protected entity, and the subject of more philosophical debates than she cared to count. All because she'd killed a monster that was trying to kill her. The galaxy was a weird place. Her communication device chimed with an incoming message. Another invitation to speak at the Academy. No doubt. Or perhaps another ceremonial function requiring her presence. She ignored it for the moment, preferring to enjoy the view. 17 different star systems were visible from this vantage point, each home to dozens of inhabited worlds, each with their own administrative systems, philosophical traditions, and insurance regulations. And all of them, in some small way, had been changed by her accidental heroism. She wondered if any of them had learned the real lesson, that sometimes survival didn't require complex systems or advanced technology. Sometimes it just required a clear head, a bit of knowledge, and the courage to act. Probably not, she decided. Bureaucracies change slowly, if at all, but at least they had better coffee now. When Alara finally returned to her quarters and checked the message, she was surprised to find it wasn't an invitation or a request. It was a notification from the GURB, informing her that her protected entity status had been upgraded to include Cosmic Incident Insurance, a new classification created specifically for her. Attached was a personal note from Inspector Moraus. Just in case you decide to go camping again. The galaxy isn't ready for any more of your practical solutions. Alara smiled and composed a reply. Don't worry. Next vacation I'm just going to the beach. Unless, of course, you have sea monsters. 3 years to the day after the Vorthax incident. A small ceremony was held on the third moon of Kepler 442c. A modest monument had been erected at the site where Alara had made galactic history, inscribed with a simple message in 17 different languages. Here, a human taught the galaxy that practical solutions transcend administrative boundaries. Alara attended, along with Verax, Minari, and a much calmer Doral. They stood together at the spot where they had first met, now transformed into a tourist destination, complete with a gift shop selling plush Vorthax toys and I Survived the Quarantine Zone t-shirts. Did you ever imagine it would come to this? Verax asked, his 4 manipulators gesturing at the commercialization of what had once been a restricted area. Honestly, no, Alara admitted. I thought I'd be dead, or at best, have a good story to tell at parties. Instead, you changed everything, Minari said. The ACS has been completely revised. 17 new research initiatives have been launched to study human adaptability. The Philosophical Consortium has an entire wing dedicated to practical ethics. And security protocols have been enhanced across all sectors, added Doral, who still carried emergency ration packs whenever he traveled, just in case. Alara shook her head. All because I got lucky and grabbed the right spot on a space monster. Luck, skill, or destiny. The outcome remains the same, came a new voice. They turned to see Inspector Moraus approaching, their skin shifting through ceremonial patterns appropriate for commemorative events. The galaxy learned something important that day, the inspector continued. Not just about humans, but about ourselves. We had become so entrenched in our administrative systems and philosophical frameworks that we'd forgotten the value of practical action. I still think everyone's reading too much into it, Alara said with a smile. But I'm glad some good came out of it, even if I did miss my dentist appointment. As the ceremony concluded, and the attendees prepared to depart, a young Tethiari approached Alara, clutching a datapad and looking nervous. Excuse me, protected entity Alara, they said, voice quavering slightly. I'm writing my thesis on the psychological impact of the Vorthax incident. May I ask you one question? Sure, why not? Alara replied, used to such requests by now. What went through your mind in that moment when you realized you could defeat the Vorthax? What profound insight guided your actions? Alara considered the question for a moment, then laughed. Honestly, I was thinking about my cat's litter box. I knew if I died on that moon, no one would change it for weeks, and my apartment would smell terrible. The young academic stared at her in confusion. Sometimes, Alara explained gently, the most powerful motivation isn't some grand philosophical principle or moral imperative. Sometimes it's just the everyday stuff, the little responsibilities and connections that make up a life. I didn't want to die because I had things to do back home. Simple as that. As the academic hurried away to reconsider their thesis, Inspector Moraus approached Alara once more. You know they'll never understand, the inspector said. The Alliance has spent millennia building elaborate systems to manage every aspect of existence. The idea that someone could face an apex predator while thinking about pet care is revolutionary. That's the problem with over-civilization, Alara replied. You forget the basics: food, shelter, safety, coffee. Everything else is just details. Speaking of details, Moraus said, their skin shifting to the regulatory shade of formal notification. Your 5-year protected entity review is coming up. The board is considering adding interstellar diplomatic privileges to your classification. Alara groaned. More ceremonies? More speaking engagements? More philosophical debates? I'm afraid so. Your impact on Alliance culture continues to grow. There are now 17 different academic disciplines studying various aspects of what they call the Alara effect. She sighed dramatically, but there was a smile behind it. Fine, but I want better travel accommodations and real coffee on every ship. I believe that can be arranged, Morales said, their skin rippling with amused compliance. As they walked back toward the landing area where their ship waited, Alara took one last look at the monument and the site where her unexpected adventure had begun. The crystalline fragments of the Vorthax had long since been collected for study, and the acid pools had been neutralized and filled in. It looked like any other rocky outcropping now, unremarkable except for the memorial plaque. "You know what's funny?" she said to no one in particular. "I never did get to see those unique geological formations the guidebook promised." "Perhaps next vacation," suggested Verax. "No way," Alara laughed. "I'm sticking to beaches and resorts from now on. No more camping in quarantine zones." "A wise decision," agreed Inspector Morales. The insurance premiums for intentional apex predator engagement would be astronomical. As their ship lifted off from the moon's surface, Alara gazed out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her cat was waiting in her apartment on Earth, blissfully unaware that its litter box had changed the course of galactic history. The universe was full of wonders, dangers, and opportunities. 15,000 species, countless worlds, infinite possibilities. And all it had taken to shake the foundations of this vast civilization was one human woman who refused to panic when faced with a monster. Not because she was brave or special or destined for greatness, but because she had a practical mind, a dentist appointment to keep, and a cat that needed her. They wanted her to be a weapon, a deity, a psychological counselor. They only realized at the end what she truly needed: coffee and a ticket home. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the best ones. 5 years after the Vorthax incident, Alara sat in her apartment on Earth, sipping real coffee and scrolling through her messages. 17 different invitations to commemorative events, academic conferences, and ceremonial functions. 3 requests for interviews from major galactic media outlets. 1 notification from the GURB about updates to her protected entity insurance policy. And a personal message from Inspector Morales. Thinking of going camping again? The Alliance has finally created protocols for recreational activities involving potential apex encounters. I can send you the paperwork. Only 1,700 pages. Alara laughed and typed a reply. No thanks. My cat would never forgive me if I missed another litter box change. But if you're ever in the neighborhood, I've found a coffee shop that makes a decent galactic blend. No paperwork required. She sent the message, then set aside her communication device and picked up her cat, who had been impatiently headbutting her leg. You have no idea how important you are to interstellar relations, she told the purring animal. An entire galaxy reorganized its understanding of species capabilities, all because I wanted to get home to change your litter box. The cat, unimpressed by its cosmic significance, simply purred louder and kneaded Alara's lap. Outside her window, barely visible in the daylight sky, a small fleet of Alliance ships maintained their protective orbit around Earth. Not because humans were considered dangerous, though the ACS had been revised to include a notation about unexpected practical problem-solving capabilities in their profile, but because one particular human had shown the galaxy that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions came from the most ordinary motivations. They had wanted to make her a legend. She had just wanted to go home. In the end, they both got what they wanted. And somewhere in the vast administrative archives of the Galactic Alliance, filed under incident reports, anomalous encounters, was the original interview transcript from the Diligent Seeker. The final exchange had become famous throughout diplomatic circles. Chief Technician Verax. After everything you've experienced, what wisdom would you share with the Alliance? Human Alara. Always pack extra coffee on camping trips. And don't overthink things. Sometimes a monster is just a monster, and all you need to do is find the weak spot. Emergency Medical Specialist Minari. Is that a metaphor for addressing larger societal challenges? Human Alara. No, it's advice about killing space monsters. But I guess it works for paperwork too. The simplest solutions were indeed often the best.